At first light, the airfield is silent. Concrete runways stretch into mist. Metal hangars stand half open, their doors unmoving. Inside them sit aircraft that once filled the night sky with noise now coated in dust, tires flat, fuel tanks dry. The war is over, but the machines remain. Their camouflage is fading, their purpose has vanished. The question is not how they fought, it is what happened next. In the summer of 1945, Britain emerged from 6 years of total war. Victory had been secured, but at an enormous cost. Cities were damaged, industry was exhausted, and the national debt had soared to unprecedented levels. The Royal Air Force, which in 1944 had operated more than 9,000 frontline aircraft, now faced rapid demobilization. Among the most numerous of those aircraft was the Vickers Wellington. The Wellington had entered service in 1938. By the outbreak of war, formed the backbone of Bomber Command's medium bomber force. It carried the early bombing campaign over Germany, the first raids into occupied Europe. It held the line during the dangerous years before four-engined heavy bombers were available in large numbers. But by 1945, the strategic situation had changed completely. Jet aircraft were entering service. Heavy bombers like the Lancaster and Halifax dominated long-range operations, and Britain no longer had the resources to maintain a massive wartime fleet. At its peak, more than 11,400 Wellingtons had been built, produced in factories across Britain. They served not just with Bomber Command, but with Coastal Command, training units, squadrons across the globe, from the Middle East to the Far East. Few British aircraft types were used in as many roles, by as many crews, in as many theaters. Yet by the end of 1945, most of them were already obsolete. The scale of the post-war problem was enormous. Thousands of aircraft were scattered across Britain and former wartime airfields in Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Each Wellington represented tons of valuable aluminum, steel, rubber, and complex machinery. Keeping them airworthy required skilled labor, spare parts, and fuel resources Britain could no longer afford to waste. The government's priority was reconstruction, housing, and economic recovery, not maintaining surplus bombers. The RAF began standing down squadrons at incredible speed. Aircraft were flown to central storage units or simply parked at their home bases. Engines were filled with oil to prevent corrosion. Sensitive equipment was removed. Armament was stripped out. Some airframes were cannibalized to keep a few others flying during the brief transition period, but the vast majority were marked for disposal. The Wellington's unique construction played a decisive role in what happened next. Its geodetic airframe, designed by the legendary Barnes-Vollis, used a lattice of intersecting aluminum beams to distribute stress across the entire structure. This made the aircraft remarkably strong and resistant to battle damage. But it also made it difficult to modify, upgrade, or break down efficiently. Unlike conventional aircraft, Wellingtons could not be easily converted into post-war transports or civilian airliners. Other bombers, like the Lancaster, offered more internal volume and simpler structures for conversion. The Wellington, with its narrow bomb bay and fuselage shape dictated by that complex geodetic framework, was a non-starter for civilian life. Any major redesign would have been prohibitively expensive. By late 1945, the Air Ministry had reached a clear conclusion. The Wellington had no long-term future in Britain's post-war air force. Disposal began methodically. Aircraft deemed surplus were sold to scrap contractors. The process was brutally efficient. At many airfields, rows of Wellingtons were lined up on grass or concrete. Engines were removed first, often reused for technical instruction. Propellers, instruments, and radios were salvaged. Then, cutting torches reduced the remaining airframes to sections within hours. What had once required thousands of man-hours to build disappeared in a matter of days. Photographs from 1946 and 1947 show ghostly fields filled with skeletal fuselages and detached wings, awaiting removal. The valuable aluminum was melted down and recycled, finding new life in civilian goods and construction materials, helping to rebuild the very country the bombers had fought to protect. Not all Wellingtons were destroyed immediately. Some continued in service for specific roles. Coastal Command retained a limited number for maritime patrol and anti-submarine training during the immediate post-war years. These aircraft operated over the Atlantic and North Sea, monitoring shipping lanes and training crews. But their days were numbered. Newer aircraft, like the Avro Shackleton, soon replaced them. Training units also kept Wellingtons for a short time. Their forgiving handling characteristics made them suitable for teaching pilots to fly multi-engine aircraft. But even here, the aircraft's age and maintenance demands worked against it. By 1948, most RAF training units had transitioned to newer designs. A small number of Wellingtons were transferred to foreign air forces, as countries rebuilding their military aviation after the war, or those with limited industrial capacity, accepted surplus British aircraft as a short-term solution. But with scarce spare parts and limited technical support, most of these exported Wellingtons were grounded or scrapped within a few years. Across the former empire, abandoned Wellingtons met different fates. In the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East, some aircraft were simply left at remote airfields where recovery wasn't economical. Exposure to heat, sand, and corrosion quickly reduced them to wrecks, slowly dissolving back into the landscape. In parts of India and the Mediterranean, airframes were dismantled locally and repurposed for whatever materials they could provide. After the war, Allied investigators showed limited interest in the Wellington. Unlike advanced German weapons or jet aircraft, it offered little in terms of cutting-edge technology. The geodetic structure was already well understood, and its advantages were offset by production complexity. American and Soviet technical missions focused their attention elsewhere. What did attract attention, however, was the sheer intensity of wear on the surviving airframes. Post-war inspections revealed fatigue, cracks, corrosion, and structural stress consistent with years of continuous combat use. Many Wellingtons had flown hundreds of sorties. Some had absorbed flak damage multiple times and returned to service after field repairs. These aircraft were quite simply worn out. But it was economics that ultimately sealed their fate. Britain in 1945 was effectively bankrupt. The American Lend-Lease program had ended abruptly. Export markets needed civilian goods, not bombers. Every surplus aircraft sitting on an airfield represented tied-up capital and ongoing storage costs. Scrapping them was not an act of disregard, but a harsh financial necessity. By the early 1950s, the Wellington had almost completely vanished from RAF service. Out of more than 11,000 built, only a handful were preserved, largely by chance. Some survived because they were stored overseas and forgotten. Others were retained as instructional airframes that were never scrapped. Eventually, fewer than 10 complete examples would remain. Today, those survivors sit quietly in museums. Their fabric-covered frames and narrow fuselages look modest compared to the giant bombers that followed. They carry no bomb loads, no fuel, no crews waiting for orders. Their presence is not dramatic. It is restrained, almost understated. The historical verdict on the Wellington is clear. It was not a war-winning aircraft on its own. It suffered heavy losses in the early bombing campaigns. It was eventually overshadowed by more capable designs. Yet it filled a critical gap at a moment when Britain had few alternatives. Its rapid post-war disappearance was not a failure. It was the natural conclusion for a machine built for a specific emergency. Once that emergency passed, its utility ended. In the quiet airfields where Wellingtons once stood, wingtip to wingtip, grass now grows through cracks in the concrete. Hangars have been demolished or converted. Runways serve civilian airports or lie broken beneath farmland. Nothing remains to suggest the urgency that once defined those places. The Wellington did not fade into legend, did not shape the future of aviation. It did what it was designed to do, and then it was dismantled. And in that silence after the engines stopped, after the crews went home, after the scrap cutters finished, the aircraft finally became what history required it to be: a record of effort, a measure of sacrifice, a reminder that even the most essential machines are temporary. Thank you for watching. If you found this story interesting, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.